11:51 p.m. in Seattle. The rain was hitting my office window like static, matching the hum of the spreadsheet on my screen. I was hunting for a missing $40,000 in a client's fraud case when my phone buzzed against the desk. One text. From my mother, Barbara. It didn't say hello. It didn't ask how I was. It just read, "We need the room for Samantha's yoga studio. We have packed your things. Best of luck." I stared at the glowing screen, my coffee turning cold in my hand. I didn't even have time to process the shock before a second notification pinged. It was from a local marketplace app. I tapped it open. There, in a photo uploaded 3 minutes ago, was my childhood bed, my desk, and my reading lamp. The caption read, "Priced for quick sale." They hadn't just kicked me out. They had liquidated my entire existence before I had even left the building. Pause for a second. Drop a comment and let me know what time is it where you are right now, and have you ever had someone cut you off without even looking you in the eye? I want to hear your story. I didn't type a response. I didn't call Samantha to ask why she needed a yoga studio in the room where I had studied for my CPA exams. In my line of work, you learn that when a company decides to downsize you, begging doesn't save your job. It just makes the security guard walk you out faster. I looked at the text again. It wasn't a family dispute. It was a business decision. I was taking up square footage that yielded no return on investment for them. Samantha, with her aspiring influencer career and yoga dreams, was the high-risk, high-reward stock they were betting on. I was just the steady, boring bond that had matured, and they were cashing me out. I stood up. My legs felt steady, too steady. I walked down the hall to the guest room where I had been staying between leases. I opened my duffel bag and started filling it with the efficiency of a foreclosure agent clearing a property. Laptop, chargers, 2 suits, my backup hard drive. I didn't look at the walls. I didn't look for sentimental items. I only packed assets. If it didn't help me survive tomorrow, it stayed behind. Passing the master bedroom on my way to the front door, I noticed it was cracked open an inch. I could see the flickering blue light of the television and hear the canned laughter of a sitcom. They were awake. They knew I was out here. They were just waiting for the problem to resolve itself so they wouldn't have to have an uncomfortable conversation. I didn't knock. I took my house key off the ring. It made a sharp, metallic clink as I set it on the granite kitchen island. That sound was the only goodbye they deserved. It was the sound of a contract closing. My car started with a shudder. I backed out of the driveway, the rain blurring the house into a gray smudge in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. Looking back is for people who think there is something left to save. I drove toward downtown Seattle. The highway was a ribbon of wet asphalt and red taillights. The heater in my old sedan was broken, blowing lukewarm air that smelled of dust, but the cold sharpened my mind. I ran the calculations. Hotel? Too expensive for an indefinite stay, given my current liquidity. Friends? I had spent so much time working to prove my worth to my parents that I hadn't invested in a social safety net. There was only one other person in this family who understood what it meant to be erased. Uncle Vincent. My father's estranged brother. The one they called cold. The one they called selfish because he refused to bail them out of their bad investments 3 years ago. I pulled up to his building 20 minutes later. It was a tower of glass and steel that pierced the rainy sky, looking more like a fortress than a home. I sat in the car for 5 minutes, watching the wipers slash back and forth. If he turned me away, I would sleep in the car. It wouldn't be the first time I had to improvise shelter. I got out, the rain instantly soaking my blazer. I walked to the intercom panel and pressed the button for the penthouse. The buzz was loud in the quiet night. I waited for a voice to ask who it was, or tell me to go away. The line clicked open. There was no static, just silence. Then a voice as dry as old paper. "Come up," he said. "34th floor. Don't drip on the marble." The lock clicked. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped into the lobby. It smelled of white tea and money. For the first time that night, my shoulders dropped an inch. I wasn't welcomed with a hug. I was welcomed with an instruction. And honestly, that was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in years. Life with Uncle Vincent was not a rescue mission. It was a merger and acquisition. He didn't offer me a shoulder to cry on. He offered me a desk and a login to his Bloomberg terminal. The morning after I arrived, he slid a contract across the breakfast counter. It stated that he would cover my undergraduate and master's degrees in full. In exchange, I would serve as the internal auditor for his personal estate. He told me that generosity without accountability was just enabling, and he had no interest in raising another liability like his brother. So, while my friends spent their college weekends at parties, I spent mine cross-referencing Vincent's investment dividends against his tax filings. I learned to spot a decimal point error from 3 feet away. I learned that numbers, unlike people, never lie to you. If the math doesn't add up, it means someone is hiding something. During those years, I kept tabs on my family, but only through the glass of a screen. It was like watching a slow-motion crash in high definition. Nicole and Samantha were building their brands. That's what they called it. I scrolled past photos of Nicole in Tulum, captioned, "Living my best life," and Samantha in Paris, holding shopping bags that cost more than my tuition. My parents were in the background of every picture, smiling that tight, desperate smile of people who are financing a lifestyle they can't actually afford. I watched them refinance their home twice in 5 years to fund my sister's ventures, a boutique that never opened, a modeling career that never launched. One night, I was sitting in Vincent's study, staring at a photo of my sisters on a yacht in the Mediterranean. I felt that old sting of jealousy. Why did they get the ease, while I got the grind? Vincent walked in, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, and set the glass down next to my hand. He tapped the screen of my laptop where the photo was glowing. He asked me what I saw. I told him I saw freedom. He shook his head and told me to look again. He said I was looking at a bubble. He told me that they were chasing validation, and validation is a volatile market. It spikes high, but it crashes the moment the attention shifts. He pointed to the stack of textbooks on my desk. He said, "You, Rachel, are building equity. Equity takes time. It's boring. It's slow. But it pays dividends forever. That is the compound interest of character." That conversation rewired me. I stopped looking at my family with envy and started looking at them with a forensic lens. I didn't see success anymore. I saw leverage and bad debt. I saw a balance sheet bleeding red ink masked by filters and hashtags. By the time I graduated and landed a job at a top forensic accounting firm, I knew the truth. My parents were insolvent. They were borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and eventually, Peter was going to break their legs. There were times I wanted to intervene. I wanted to call them and scream that the interest rates were going to eat them alive. But every time I reached for the phone, Vincent would stop me with a single look. He had one rule that governed his entire empire, and he made sure I memorized it before I signed my first audit. He said, "You can't save people who are addicted to their own destruction. Never invest in a bankrupt entity, Rachel. Not with your money, and definitely not with your heart." So, I didn't call. I just watched, and I waited for the inevitable correction. The crash didn't happen in the market. It happened in the master suite on a Tuesday morning. A massive stroke. Vincent was gone before he hit the floor. When the concierge called me, I didn't scream. I simply closed my laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the city he had taught me to understand. The grief was a heavy, silent weight in my chest, like a stone dropped into deep water. I had lost the only person who saw me as an asset rather than a liability. But Vincent hated inefficiency, and he despised pity. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and began the logistics of death. I arranged a private service, small, dignified, no fanfare, just his business partners, his staff, and a few old friends who knew the man behind the money. I stood by the mahogany casket, keeping my hands clasped behind my back to hide the tremor in my fingers. The air smelled of white lilies and rain. It was peaceful, until the doors opened. My family arrived like they were walking a red carpet. My mother, Barbara, wore a black dress that I recognized from a recent runway show, something that cost more than my first car. My father followed, looking solemn in a way that felt rehearsed. Behind them were Nicole and Samantha, checking their phones as they walked down the aisle, their oversized sunglasses hiding eyes that I knew were perfectly dry. They weren't here to mourn a brother or an uncle. They were here to audit the vault. They were mourning an ATM, not a man. I watched them approach with the detachment of a scientist observing an invasive species. I knew exactly what was coming. They would try to provoke a reaction. They would try to use guilt, anger, or false intimacy to get a foothold in the conversation about the inheritance. But I was ready. Barbara reached me first. She grabbed my hands, her grip tight and clammy. "Rachel," she breathed, pitching her voice loud enough for the room to hear. "We had no idea you were so close to him. We are so devastated. Family is all we have left." I studied her face. In the past, I would have snapped. I would have yelled that they hadn't spoken to Vincent in 15 years. I would have screamed that they only cared about the will. But anger is energy, and I wasn't going to give them a single kilowatt. I engaged the protocol Vincent and I had discussed years ago for dealing with toxic investors. The gray rock method. You don't fight fire with fire. You become a rock. Boring. Unresponsive. Impenetrable. "Thank you for coming," I said. My voice was flat, monotone. Barbara blinked, expecting pushback. She leaned in closer. "We need to discuss the estate, honey. The funeral costs, the house. We should manage the transition together. I'm sure Vincent wanted us to look after you." "The lawyer is handling the administration," I said, staring at a spot on her shoulder. "Yes. But we're family," she pressed, her smile straining at the edges. "We should have a preliminary meeting before the official reading, just to make sure everyone is on the same page." I checked my watch. "The reading is on Monday. You will be informed." I pulled my hands away gently and turned to greet a bewildered-looking business associate, effectively ending the conversation. I saw Barbara's face twist in frustration out of the corner of my eye. She wanted a fight. She wanted drama. Instead, I gave her nothing but static. I could feel their eyes boring into my back for the rest of the service, calculating, whispering. Let them whisper. They didn't know that silence is the loudest noise you can make in a room full of liars. The law firm of Sterling, Holt, and Associates was located on the 42nd floor, 8 stories higher than Vincent's penthouse. The view from the conference room was a panoramic sweep of the Puget Sound, steel-gray water meeting a steel-gray sky. The room itself was designed to intimidate. A mahogany table long enough to land a plane on, floor-to-ceiling windows, and silence so thick you could hear the air conditioning hum. I arrived 15 minutes early. I sat on the side of the table facing the door, my back to the view. I placed my tablet and the black ledger Vincent had left me on the polished wood. The ledger was old, bound in cracked leather, the pages filled with Vincent's cramped, angular handwriting. It wasn't a financial record of his empire. It was a personal record, a balance sheet of a different kind. At 10 o'clock sharp, the elevator chimed. My family spilled into the lobby. I could hear them before I saw them. My father's booming laugh, trying too hard to sound jovial. Samantha's voice complaining about the reception signal. They walked into the conference room with an air of ownership. My father ran a hand along the back of a leather chair as if he were already picking out furniture for his new office. Nicole and Samantha immediately went to the window to take selfies with the view, captioning them, "No doubt," with something about new beginnings or legacy. They stopped when they saw me. "Rachel," my father said, his tone shifting from owner to benevolent patriarch. "You're early. Good. Shows initiative." He pulled out the chair at the head of the table. "That seat is for Mr. Sterling," I said, not looking up from my tablet. He froze, his smile twitching, then moved to the chair opposite me. Barbara sat next to him, smoothing her skirt. The sisters flanked them. They looked like a board of directors for a company that sold exclusively bad decisions. They were practically vibrating with greed. I could see it in the way they kept glancing at the door, waiting for the man with the checkbook. They had already spent the money. I knew it. They had probably put deposits down on cars, booked vacations, maybe even looked at houses. They believed, with the absolute certainty of the delusional, that blood entitled them to the sweat of a man they had ignored for a decade. Mr. Sterling walked in a moment later. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. He carried a single, thin file folder. He didn't shake hands. He didn't offer condolences. He sat at the head of the table and opened the file. "This is the last will and testament of Vincent J. Sterling," he said. His voice was dry, professional. "Let's begin." The room shifted. The casual arrogance evaporated, replaced by a tense, hungry anticipation. My mother leaned forward, her eyes locked on the folder. My sisters finally put their phones down. I sat perfectly still, my hand resting on the cover of the black ledger. They were waiting for a windfall. I was waiting for the lesson. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and began to read. The preamble was standard legalese revocation of prior wills, payment of debts, funeral expenses. My family nodded along, impatient, their eyes darting to the bottom of the page where the numbers would be. "To the Humane Society of Seattle, I leave the sum of $50,000, Sterling read. My mother flinched slightly, but composed herself. "To the University of Washington School of Business, I leave an endowment of $100,000. The numbers were small, manageable. They were still calculating millions in the pot. Then, Sterling turned the page. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Regarding the Sterling Family Trust, my father straightened his tie. This was it. The trust was the pot of gold they believed Vincent had been sitting on for years, accumulating interest while they accumulated debt. They leaned in as one organism, ready to feed. Mr. Vincent liquidated this account 3 days before his death. The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted for 2 heartbeats, then shattered. "What?" my mother screeched, her voice cracking. "That's impossible. That account had millions in it. Where did it go?" "That's illegal!" my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "That's fraud. You can't just empty a trust." Mr. Sterling didn't flinch. He raised a single hand. It was a debt repayment, to Rachel. 4 pairs of eyes snapped to me. The shock on their faces was comical, almost cartoonish. "To her?" Nicole gasped. "For what?" Sterling pressed a button on his laptop, and the screen on the far wall flickered to life. A document appeared. It wasn't a bank transfer. It was an invoice. Detailed, itemized, forensic. Mr. Vincent tracked every single expense Rachel incurred from the day she was removed from your home at age 13, Sterling explained, his voice devoid of emotion. Tuition, rent, food, medical bills, therapy, interest compounded annually at 5%. He scrolled down. The list went on for pages. My braces, my textbooks, the used Honda I bought for my first job, the deposit on my first apartment, every dollar I had scraped together, every dollar Vincent had quietly fronted. Total damages for breach of parental contract and custodial neglect. Sterling read the final line. $340,000. He legally categorized your abandonment as a breach of contract, Sterling continued, looking over his glasses at my parents. He paid Rachel the damages from your anticipated share of the inheritance. My mother looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My father was turning a dangerous shade of purple. "This is insane," Samantha whispered, staring at the screen. "He charged us for raising her?" "No," Sterling said, closing the folder. "He charged you for not raising her." He looked at me, a rare flicker of amusement in his eyes. It is funny how the value of an asset spikes only when you realize someone else owns the title. I looked at the invoice on the screen. It wasn't about the money. It was about the record. For 15 years, they had pretended I cost them nothing. Vincent had made sure they got the bill. The reality of the invoice was still settling over them like dust when Mr. Sterling turned the final page of the file. My father was still sputtering about the $340,000, doing mental math on how much that deducted from the millions he thought were coming. He didn't understand yet. He thought that was a penalty fee. He didn't realize it was the severance package. As for the remainder of the estate, Sterling said, his voice cutting through my father's muttering, including the real estate portfolio, the liquid assets, the patent royalties, and the majority shareholder position in Sterling Ventures valued at approximately $12.5 million. He looked up. He didn't look at them. He looked at me. Mr. Vincent leaves the entirety to his sole active partner and daughter in spirit, Rachel Sterling. The room didn't just go silent. It went dead. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash, right before the screaming starts. My sister's jaws actually dropped. My father slumped back in his chair as if his strings had been cut. $12 million. Gone. Or rather, reallocated. That's everything, my mother whispered. He left her everything? Correct, Sterling said. You have no legal standing to contest. Mr. Vincent was very thorough. He anticipated you might try to claim undue influence, so he recorded video logs of his decisions every month for the last 5 years. Any attempt to challenge this will result in immediate countersuits for the legal fees, which, given your current debt-to-income ratio, I advise against. My father looked at me. For the first time in his life, he looked at me with something other than dismissal. He looked at me with fear. He realized that the person sitting across from him wasn't his daughter anymore. I was the bank, and the bank had just called the loan. My mother recovered first. Her survival instinct was stronger than her shame. She didn't get angry. She got desperate. She leaned across the wide mahogany table, her eyes filling with tears that might have actually been real this time, tears of terror. Rachel, she said, her voice trembling. She reached a hand out, hovering near mine but not daring to touch the ledger. Rachel, honey, listen. We made mistakes. We know that. But we're family. You're our daughter. You wouldn't let us lose the house. You wouldn't let your sisters starve. Nicole chimed in, her voice high and thin. Yeah, Rach, come on. You can't just keep it all. That's not fair. I surveyed the room. I looked at the people who had sold my childhood bed for quick cash 3 minutes after kicking me out. I waited for the guilt to come. I waited for that old, familiar ache that told me to fix it, to make them happy, to buy their love. It never came. All I felt was the cool, clean hum of a spreadsheet finally balancing out. I stood up. The movement was sharp enough to silence them. I picked up the black ledger. The cover remained closed. I knew every entry by heart. You called me a liability, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the corners of the room. You told me I took up too much space. You told me I offered no return on investment. So, I did what Uncle Vincent taught me. I audited the relationship. I slid the invoice across the table until it rested in front of my mother. I looked for the assets. I looked for the love, the support, the loyalty. I found nothing but bad debt and depreciation. My mother flinched as if the paper were hot. The $340,000 covers my costs, I said, picking up my tablet. The rest is equity for the partner who actually showed up. Rachel, please, my father croaked. His arrogance completely dissolved. The account is settled, I said, turning toward the door. We're closed. I walked out of the glass conference room. I didn't look back to see them crumbling. I could hear my mother sobbing, a jagged, ugly sound, but it sounded distant, like noise from a television in another room. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble floor. Click, click, click. It was the sound of walking away. It was the sound of freedom. Back at the penthouse, the storm had finally broken. I stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cold and impossibly clean, scrubbing the city below until it glittered like a circuit board of gold and silver. The frantic energy of the law firm felt a lifetime away. Up here, 34 floors above the pavement, there was no screaming, no begging. Just the wind and the quiet hum of a life that finally belonged to me. I pulled my phone out. I opened my banking app. The balance was there. a number with enough commas to solve every problem I had ever known. But as I stared at it, I realized Vincent was right. The money was just fuel. The real wealth was the silence. It was the freedom of never having to apologize for my existence again. It was the luxury of never having to prove my worth to people who couldn't afford me. I walked back inside and went to the liquor cabinet. I grabbed the bottle of single malt Vincent had saved for a special occasion he never got to see. I poured 2 glasses. One for me, one for the empty leather chair facing the window. I raised my glass to the empty room. It didn't feel lonely. It felt full. To compound interest, I whispered. The amber liquid burned on the way down, warm and grounding. I set the glass down and picked up my phone one last time. There were 4 names in it. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel a pang of regret. I simply tapped select all. Then, the names vanished. The screen went blank, then refreshed, clean and empty. I put the phone down and walked back to the railing to watch the city lights. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I wasn't a sister. I wasn't a liability. I was an architect. And for the first time in my life, I had a blank blueprint. If you've ever had to build your own family from scratch, share this story. You are the architect now.